In one of my recent videos, I said that I was doing a book chat, which I hadn't done in a while, which was true, but around these parts when it rains it pours. So today I'm recording not one but two book chats, so you will see me looking like this, doing a book chat again in the near future. But for today's topic, I'm a little late to the game probably, I normally am, but I'm going to be talking about my top 5, bottom 5 reads of 2017. I always think that these can be fairly quick videos, but that always turns out to be a lie, so I'm going to get straight into it. But everything that I'm going to talk about will be linked in the info box, so you can find out more about all of the books. I'm not going to waste too much time on a synopsis for each one, just really brief, because otherwise this will be endless. So, getting straight into it with the best, my faves. I believe this first one is the only one of the pile that hasn't been released yet, and I have a video review / discussion of it coming up very soon, so keep an eye out for that. But easily in my top 5 and coming out in February is I Stopped Somewhere by T.E. Carter. This book is traumatic. It's about assault and takes on rape culture and violence and is pretty harrowing, so just FYI. I get into all of the gory details in my discussion video, so I'm not going to do that here, but basically it gutted me. So even though there were flaws with it, there were things that I wasn't a huge fan of style-wise. For the most part, it just knocked it out of the park. It was unlike a lot of what's out there. It was unflinching and just, I don't know that it could have really taken on the topic more effectively. I highly, highly recommend it, with the caveat of if you think that it's going to ruin your month to read it, maybe don't. If it's going to hit a little too close to home, kind of take that into account, but otherwise, like, highly recommended. And I will leave a link to the video, which might not be live when you're watching this, but will be live soon. Before I go any further, let me introduce you to my latest. This was a Christmas present to myself. The T kind of keeps you from being able to see it, but it's the Marauders map. On this side it says Marauders map, and on this side it says Mischief Managed. It's a thing of beauty, and will be seen in many a book and tea-chat. Just saying. Up next we have, speaking of things that kind of gutted me a little bit, which was no surprise, Words in Deep Blue by Cath Crowley. Cath Crowley has a tendency to write things that are so poignant in the least saccharine, least artificial way, and that aren't bogged down by it. Some people write things that are very, you know, occasionally sad or deal with weighty topics, and the whole thing is weighty. I Stopped Somewhere, the whole thing was weighty, but it didn't feel fake. But there are those people who want to pull your strings, they want to get that reaction, because then you will immediately fave the book because, you know, it made you cry or whatever. I don't like that if it feels false. Cath Crowley never feels false. She feels very honest, and there is a brightness in there. So it's not just you're going to be bogged down by whatever is being dealt with. In this case, it is the death of a family member and kind of working through that, as well as coming to age and a little bit of romance, and it's really a love letter to readers. It's sprinkled throughout with letters, told in alternating viewpoints. Everything about it was lovely and engaging, and her style just pulls you right along. I recommend all of Cath Crowley's. This is no exception. For something totally different than those two, I have Berserker by Emily Laybourne. This, I feel like, didn't get enough love last year. I didn't see anyone else really talking about it, and I think that that is a shame because it was really, really good. It is brutal and gory and no holds barred, and fantastical, and occasionally romantic, and has a depth I wasn't expecting. It has characters that I loved. It has a great sort of Norse Old World mythology meets the New World Old West. Just, it was firing on all cylinders. Really fun. Different, again, from what's out there, and I just thoroughly enjoyed it. So, more people need to pick this up. More people need to talk about it. It was great. The last 2 spots in my top 5 were digital, and it's probably going to be pointless for me to show you because all I can get to show up is this tiny little picture. But number 4 is The Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah J. Maas. This is the second book in the Court series, so I'm not going to get too much into details because spoilers, but I liked it better than the first and I loved the first. I thought that she tackled the sort of traumatic experiences that the main character had had in a really believable way. The struggles that she goes through in book 2 and the way her thinking changes, the way she changes, the way that things are confronted felt so real in a way that we never seem to get in any books, but especially YA. It was just so good. The stakes were upped and everything was kind of upended in the best way. Clearly it's time for more tea. I loved it across the board. It might have been a little long, but it was my pick for the, I think it was the fantasy section of the 20, whatever, would have been 2016, I guess. The YA BookTube Awards, was that what it was called? Pretty sure it was called YA BookTube Awards. It was a thing that I was a judge of at the very beginning of last year, and my mind is fuzzy right now, but that's what I picked. Gory Mist and Fury. It was excellent. The 5th spot is actually a little bit of a tie between two very different books. One is A Face Like Glass by Frances Harding, which was weird and quirky and so dark, so much darker than I was expecting. I don't even know how to give you a synopsis on it because it's the most bizarre. But just to pique your interest, it's about a little girl who has no face, who lives in the cheese tunnels in a sort of magical poisony land. Really weird. I would show you, but it's currently stuck behind my heavy-ass bed and I can't get it out. The other book that it's tied with, totally different, and that is The Gentleman's Guide to Vice and Virtue, which I listened to as an audiobook, and though it was a little bit of a rocky start for me, it became the book that everyone was recommending to me. It became just lovely, joyous, and fun, and again had surprising depth. Both books equally deserving to get that last spot in the top 5, so they're gonna share. I don't think either one of them would appreciate that. I don't think either of them would share well, but it is what it is. That's what's happening. So those were my top 5-ish. I will probably include some honorable mentions in the description because, surprisingly, there were more books that I liked than I realized last year. Probably sounds silly, but when I kind of thought about the year, I kept thinking that it was a little blah reading-wise, that I was a little unimpressed with things. Things weren't really standing out to me as, like, amazing. And it wasn't until I looked back through my Goodreads that I realized just how much there really was that I thoroughly enjoyed. I don't know why I had that impression of blahness, because there was actually less that I didn't like than I realized. So the point of that is there will be honorable mentions in the info, and oh my god, I just realized I forgot Saga Volume 7. That definitely should have been in the top 5. All Saga, all the time, always at the top. Moving on, my bottom 5 was mostly digital, but I do have one physical book to show you, and I don't know how I slogged through it all the way. But it was The Bone Season by Samantha Shannon, and I was really surprised that this ended up in my least faves. This had been so hyped, everyone had recommended it, like, to everybody, and to me specifically. Everyone was like, oh, you're gonna love that book. When I showed it in a hall, everyone was like, yeah, Bone Season. I don't get it. It is a mess, I kind of think. It felt like it needed to go through a few more rounds. I hate to say that about any published book, it feels kind of awful, but it needed to be tightened up, it needed to be focused, it was just chaotic. It just wasn't there. I don't even know how to describe it. I'm pretty sure that I reviewed it, and I'll leave a link if I did. I kept thinking it was going to come around, and it didn't, and by the end I was like, hate reading, pushing myself through and being really mad at myself that I was still going with it, but I kept holding out for what I thought was going to happen. There were aspects that I liked, don't get me wrong. There was actually some key parts of it that I really did like, and I think they're what kept me holding on, but for the most part, I ended up just being so let down and a little bit angry that I had read this. Spots 2 and 3 is a tied one. It belongs to The Rose and the Dagger and The Wrath and the Dawn, both of which I read digitally for that BookTube Awards thing that I was telling you about, and I would not have finished them had it not been for that. I had to read the second book, Rose and the Dagger, which meant that I had to read the first book, The Wrath and the Dawn. This is another one that people seem to praise to high heavens, and loved the romance, loved the take on Scheherazade, loved the fantasy elements in the world building, and really the only thing I liked about it was the fantasy elements, the world building, but even that I felt could have been dialed up more. The romance, I really had meant to either write or record or rant about this series, but I had to set it aside and be done with it because I was just sick of it. But I think the judging video for the category is still up, and if it is, I'll link to it so you can hear my thoughts on it. I was so very bothered by the romance that is presented in this book and the way in which it's presented. It is just foobar. It is so, I have a little bit of a pet peeve with the really troublesome, problematic romances that are sometimes presented in YA with very dark, murderous, literally murderous male leads and the women who somehow fall for them and find them perfect. But this one might take the cake. It's unbelievable. I'm not going to get into spoilers, but just this book, this series left such a bad taste in my mouth, and though it started to get better through the second book, and I didn't actively hate it quite as much, I still never liked it. I don't like the series. I'm really disappointed with the way that things played out and the machinations that I could see kind of going on, because it felt like things happened for effect and not for the integrity of the story. It was more like shocking moments, you know? Again, it goes back to that sort of saccharine pulling your strings thing. This series was the same in some elements, but not in a saccharine way, in a shock and awe type of way. I was just thoroughly kind of angry at this book, and I'm really surprised by the amount of people who wholly love it and recommend it and like the romance. Like, we need to chat. I don't get it. Number 4 is a comic, and that is Wolf Volume 2. This was my Rat Queens Volume 3 of this year. Basically, 2016, Volume 1 of Rat Queens and part of Volume 2 ended up in my top reads. Volume 3 tanked it all the way down to the bottom reads and made me pretty angry at the whole series. That kind of happened again this year with Wolf. I loved Volume 1. I could see the flaws, I could see the problems people had with it. A lot of people found it confusing and disjointed. Totally got that, but it wasn't too much for me. Like, I was vibing with it. I got it. Not so Volume 2. All of the flaws of Volume 1 were, like, dialed way up in Volume 2. It was a mess. Again, it was one of those things where the illustration style has changed because the illustrator has changed, and though I never do too well with an art change mid-series, it has to really win me over or bring something new to the table, and in this case, it detracted. I couldn't even tell who some of the main characters were at times. It was clunkier, it lacked the subtlety and the beauty of the first volume. I just was let down across the board this time. The story was a mess. It needed more cohesion, it needed some editing, it needed some clarity. I really liked the series. I was really looking forward to Volume 2, and damn it. So, I don't know if I'll move forward with Volume 3. I did end up reading Rat Queens Volume 4. It was okay. It's getting back on track, I think. It had some flaws, but it's getting there. Hopefully, Wolf can do that too, but it did not for Volume 2. And the 5th and final spot belongs to all of the bevy of books that I just drifted out on this year. This was why I had the impression of it being a not great reading year, because I started things and would get so far in and just be like, whatever. Even when I was liking them in the beginning, just drifted out. The Glittering Court by Rochelle Mead. I feel like I was reading that one for months and only getting to the halfway point. Like, it was in some warp zone where I kept reading, but I wasn't moving forward. Finally, had to DNF it. The big one, though, that really surprised me was Girl of Fire and Thorns by Ray Carson. Everyone had recommended that. Everyone loved it. It sounded so good. It started off pretty strong, but I literally have 22 pages, I think, before that book is finished, completed, done, and I DNF'd it because I just didn't care. It sat on my bed taken up space for literal months, while I would pick up something else and be like, I'm gonna go ahead and just read this. I'm more in the mood for this. I'll go back to Girl of Fire and Thorns. And I just wasn't going back. I just needed to admit that. There were definite issues that I had with it. One of them was one that people seemed to praise the most, and that was fat representation. Everyone was so excited to have an unabashedly fat character going on adventures, but that became like her soul-finding characteristic. It was so not great, guys. It wasn't good. But beyond that, I just didn't care. There came a point where someone very integral to the story died, and I was like, okay. That was my last moment of fuck, and once it was gone, it was gone. There were none left to give. But there were others like that. I mean, there were so many books that I kind of picked up and just was like, whatever. Yeah, all of the ones that kind of dragged me down and just couldn't keep my little squirrel brain interested. There was nothing shiny to keep me there. Those are the 5th spot on my worst of 2017 reading. But there you have it. There are, in theory, my 10 books of the year, but it was definitely more than that. As I said, I'm going to have some more honorable mentions on the good side linked below, which includes some more comics and some Jane Austen reading, because those almost made it into the top 5. There were some good ones in there. But there are other things in there too. There will be a nice little list down there, so make sure to check it out. Also, let me know what your faves and least faves were of the year. I would love to hear what they are and why, because sometimes even the least faves, when you hear the reasons why someone disliked them, might appeal to you. There are plenty of times that I hear why someone didn't like something, and I'm like, oh, I think I would like that, actually. So, chat with me in the comments. But that is all for this video. I will see you guys again soon, as I said, for that I Stopped Somewhere discussion, and for another book chat looking just like this. Lazy vlogger. But until then, thank you guys for watching, and happy reading. Kimba, don't do it. Kimba, don't do it, bro. Don't do it. Thank you. I mean, it needed to be tightened up. This is so rude, bro. Why you gotta do it, bro? Why you gotta do it? Come on, you need to get down. You need to get down. You're not being a good boy. No, don't tell me no.